whom you may have heard of, Camila Mejia, Joshua Castile, Kevin Benderman, Mac Bika, Herman Kaiser, Pamela Lightsey, I think. It's all of them are very different. Two of them are Vietnam-era veterans arrested from Iraq. Some of them, the vets wanted to go to war. Tyler Boudreaux's another one. He'd been a Marine for 12 years and volunteered to go to Iraq. But what it describes is whether you wanted to go to war and whether you were wanted to serve, or whether you went because you had to, like Camila Mejia. There's an impact that war has on human conscience. And that impact often takes years to settle in. So my father was a 29-year enlisted man in the Army and a medic, and he went to Vietnam and came home a wreck. And he might have had PTSD, but what I think really wrecked him was this thing called moral injury. And about 4 years ago, some VA clinicians wrote an essay trying to explain why moral injury wasn't being adequately treated by the VA or anybody, because it was totally confused with PTSD. And they were articulating why they're not the same thing. Because PTSD is a fear reaction that your brain does automatically. It's not something you control. If you're afraid, your brain does certain things. And if you're terrorized a lot, your brain does other things. But what happens is that PTSD actually causes the fear centers in your brain to grow and your thinking centers to lose tissue. So it's actually a physical thing that happens in your brain, and there are treatments for it, if you can get treatment, that help calm down most kind of things that, like, if you know anything about PTSD, you know those are symptoms. When those symptoms calm down and your thinking brain actually starts to get healthy again, and you can actually construct a memory narrative that actually has a cause and effect, and you could tell a story to yourself about what happened, that's when you begin to morally evaluate things. And you can't get to that if your PTSD is severe. It's hard to do because you can't create a coherent memory. You just have pieces of a memory or even holes in your memory. And once you begin to develop that story and you begin to think and reflect about what happened to you, you can decide that you really you're not a good person. Or you can decide that you don't really, even if you know what's right and wrong, you don't trust yourself to make good decisions. Or you may decide you did something, and you may come out of that deciding you're angry at your government. You may decide that you are angry at yourself. You may experience intense grief and sorrow and loss. You may have lost your best friend and feel like you should have died in his place or her place. There are all these feelings that are part of a moral evaluation and a process of grieving that come home from war, but often don't get felt for a long time. So a lot of the vets that we've talked to and that we work with, they think they're fine for a year or two. They're busy going to school, getting a job. They're busy task-oriented. They have that continuing sense of urgency. And then 2 or 3 years, or sometimes a decade, or several decades out, they start to really experience this thing called moral injury.